Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Joanne, do we have any apologies?
None.
Lovely, thank you. I'll just read you some housekeeping rules. To introduce myself, I'm Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should remember to sign up when leaving the building after today's meeting. Otherwise, they'll be looking for you in case you lost. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed or filmed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website. The camera will mainly capture the backs of anyone making deputations, but there will be some footage of them as they approach and leave the table where the microphones are located, and of people entering or leaving the room while the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please can everyone remember to use the microphones provided when they are speaking, and it's the button on the right. Does anybody wish explicitly not to be filmed? Okay, thank you. Take it that that's fine. Right, let's introduce ourselves. As I said, I'm Lynn Stagg, Cabinet Member.
I'm Councillor Graham Heaney, Councillor Jude Warden, the Labour spokesman on traffic and transportation.
Councillor Simon Bosher, Conservative spokesman.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Michelle Lovesafer, Travel Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Nikki Musson, Parking Team, Portsmouth City Council.
Kevin McKee, Parking Manager, Portsmouth City Council.
Hayley Trower, Air Quality for Transport.
Pam Turton, Assistant Director of Transport.
Joanne Miles-Smith, Democratic Services.
Thank you, everybody. So, shall we start with... declarations of members' interest. Any interest pertinent to this meeting?
Just one query. I work at the university and we're talking about universities not having permits. I don't have an interest in the issue as far as I'm concerned. No problem?
It's up to the member to decide if it is, but it shouldn't be a pecuniary one to you. So.
I wouldn't have thought that was declarable interest. Right. Thank you, everybody. Right. Item number 1, which is TRO 18B 2019 parking restriction proposals, Cobden Avenue, Holland Road, Dryden Avenue, Winter Road. And who is speaking on this? Is it Nikki? Oh, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin.
Chair. A number of proposals relating to parking restrictions are put forward throughout each year via TROs. And these are made in response to concerns about road safety or traffic management or to accommodate an identified need. They're received from residents, councillors, emergency services and public services. When objections are received to the council's proposals, a report to the cabinet member is required for a decision to be made at a public meeting. During the 21-day public consultation on the proposals under TRO 18/2019, objections were received to 4 out of the 25 proposals. These relate to Cobden Avenue, Holland Road, Dryden Avenue and Winter Road. The full details are contained within the report, and so to summarise, the report carries the following recommendations in light of the information provided by local people. 2.1, the 12-metre length of double yellow line in Cobden Avenue outside numbers 49 to 53 is not removed as proposed and therefore remains in place. 2.2, the 16 metres of double yellow line proposed at the western end of Holland Road are not installed. 2.3, as proposed, double yellow lines are installed on the south side of Dryden Avenue. The existing disabled bays are relocated to the north side and the proposed disabled bay is installed on the north side with white line markings applied in front of the steps on the north side. And 2.4, as proposed, double yellow lines are reinstated in place of the 23 metres of a yellow line in Winter Road between Wimborne Road and Evans Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Have you, councillors, have you got any comments? Oh, no, there are no
request for deputations on this item.
No. Good, thank you. Any comments or questions from councillors? Okay, thank you. Well, I think that goes, we accept those proposals. And the next one is, item number 4 is TRO 57, stroke 2019 parking restriction proposals, Martin Road, Maidford Grove and Watermead Road. Is that you again, Karen? Deputations. Who's making a deputation? Would you like to come to the table in front? Thank you. And can you introduce yourself to us?
Yes, yeah. Do I press the switch on here?
It needs to be recorded. So.
Right. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Hang on a minute. Oh yes. The officer, Kevin, will introduce the TRO.
Thank you. Very similar to the last one. During the 21-day public consultation on this proposal, objections were received to 3 out of the 16 proposals. These relate to Martin Road, Mayford Grove and Watermead Road. Full details are contained within the report, and so to summarise, the report carries the following recommendations in the light of the information provided by local people. 2.1, the 11-metre length of double yellow line in Martin Road in front of the shared driveway and number 55 is not removed as proposed and therefore remains in place. 2.2, 34 metres of double yellow line proposed on one side of Mayford Grove are installed. 2.3, of the 67 metres of double yellow line proposed in Watermead Road, only the following are installed. A, west side, a 5-metre length north and south of the junction with sandpipers, and B, east side, 8 metres of the proposed 38 metres is installed northwards of number 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. No, is it Mr. White, is it?
Yes.
Would you like to go ahead now? Thank you.
My wife and I moved into number 1 Watermead Road in June 2018, and since then there has been a noticeable increase in the parking of vehicles, particularly commercial vehicles, on the east side between Old Farm Way and our house, the part of the road under discussion today. The whole length of the road I refer to is at present available for parking, and as such vehicles are free to park within a yard of our driveway exit, almost adjacent to our white line denoting the drive entrance. This causes a particular problem for us when high-sided vehicles choose to park there. They do so in order to eliminate difficult parking manoeuvres when they themselves have to move. It obviously prevents them from having to shunt between other vehicles, so it has become a favourite place to park. We have had skip lorries and large trucks parked there for some days at a time, particularly at weekends and holiday times, when they are out of use for long periods. There is one large van some 8 feet high and 6 feet wide that is often there for weeks at a time without moving. We have observed that the owner lives in the flats at Sandpipers. The result of this close proximity parking to our driveway is that we have a serious issue of restricted view regarding vehicles coming at speed onto Watermead Road past those that are parked on this east side stretch. This not only applies to us but to our neighbours at numbers 3 and 5 who have concerns for the same reason. I believe Mrs Spencer has submitted an email even this morning regarding her concern. We have had several near misses with cars, motorcycles and other vehicles because as we edge out of our drive we are unable to see anything coming until we're on the same side of the road that they are, which is effectively the wrong side for coming south down Watermead Road. I realise that a full restriction of parking that was originally suggested on the east side would lead to other problems if parking was then encouraged to the west side. Exiting sandpipers would then be subject to similar issues that we have. However, I would very much like to see a short restricted length of road, such as being proposed, with double yellow lines immediately adjacent to our drive on the east side. That would allow us to view clearly any oncoming vehicles as we exit. It would almost certainly eliminate any accident that will surely occur involving us if the present situation continues. Each of us is only as safe as the worst driver on the road. Near misses encountered at our drive entrance have prompted us to make this request for a change for better vision display on the east side as proposed, not just for our sakes, but for any visitors that we may have that are unfamiliar with our situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kevin, have you got any comments to make on that, or Nikki?
Yeah. As Mr. White, were you Mr. White?
Yes?
Yeah, sorry.
Hi.
Said we put forward this proposal at your request for the reasons that you've explained. And I think the recommendations reflect what you'd like to see, if that's all right, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
We don't normally put in double yellow lines just to improve visibility from exiting driveways, because obviously there's hundreds across the city. But I think this will probably benefit the wider community as well if we manage the parking in a small way, perhaps not as dramatically as we first proposed, which was the junctions as well. We actually had 6 objections to the proposal from residents of Watermead Road and further into the estate, and it would appear that the recommendations are probably the most satisfactory for everyone as an outcome. So those are the recommendations. Thanks.
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Heaney, Councillor Bosher, either of you? Any comments?
Thank you, Chairman. It's my ward, and I think it's fair to say that the Old Farm Way area, or to use the local phrase, the bird estate, because they're all bird names up in that neck of the woods, has suffered over the years with parking issues, particularly from Fitzherbert Road Industrial Estate that we actually have there, and also what was the old Julius Mellor site, which is now called Fairways, I believe, which is on the junction. It's literally sort of at 10 o'clock from your little map, if you know what I mean, which is a big housing estate that was built a few years ago, but it's one of those where it's a private estate. So they've all got an allocated parking space, and it's a private company that actually police the parking there. So any visitors, they've got nowhere else to park, so they hop across the road into Old Farm Way, and Watermead tends to be the closest because there is a walk through there. There is an ongoing problem because it's largely a one-in, one-out estate. But we do need to strike a balance, and as Mr. White has said, because I think if memory serves me, Mr. White, they're actually recessed back. There's a recessed area in which is actually shown there, and it does make it quite difficult to actually access it in and out. So I think what Nikki is proposing seems to be a good halfway house for the area, but I suspect that the nature of the estate and what it is and what's beside it, it probably won't be the last time that parking issues particularly come up, because I do notice that some of the deputations have actually mentioned it being a residence parking zone area. But I think what Nikki's actually proposed, from my perspective, is a good midway solution.
Thank you, Councillor Bosher. As it's your ward, you know it better than certainly I do. Can I suggest that perhaps we review it in 6 months' time to see if there's any, to go ahead with it and see if there are any continuing problems?
Yes, of course. If we get any reports even sooner than that, we can certainly look at changes.
Is that okay with you, Mr. White?
Yes, a good compromise. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your help.
That's right. Thank you. In that case, I think all 3 of those are okay. There you go. Pardon?
No, it's okay. I'm obviously Councillor
Oh,
Boat.
sorry.
I'm fine with it. If I want to say anything, I shall shout. Don't worry.
Okay, I did ask. Well, Oh, the written deputation is from Mr White, isn't it?
No, it's from his neighbour.
Oh, is it? Oh, my apologies. I took it to mean... Right. Shall I read this out?
I just wanted to make you aware of the written deputation that's been circulated
Yeah,
to
quite.
spokespeople for reading.
There's one thing that I have highlighted here, and I think that's the last one paragraph, which says, we have recently had refuse collection lorries unable to exit the estate due to vehicles being parked on both sides. Also large delivery of vehicles from DFS, builders, merchants and breakdown vehicles. So hopefully this will alleviate that problem if people observe the double yellow lines. And that's always open to question, isn't it? Okay. Thank you. My apologies. I did think it was Mr. White. Right. Item number 5. Speed reduction on Loxway Road. And who is introducing this? Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg. So the purpose of the report that we've brought to you today is in the Local Transport Plan 3 Implementation Plan 2018-19, funding was allocated for speed reduction schemes, and the aim of the project was that it was to be responsive to residents' speeding concerns and to introduce traffic calming at a variety of locations across the city. So that was approved in March 2018, and following on from that, with the analysis of speed data and also obviously resident correspondence and councillor correspondence, it was decided to put speed cushions along Loxway Road in the Milton ward. The reason behind this was because when we analysed the data, Loxway Road has a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, but the variance is within the top 10% of the city. So obviously it's above average. The speed is higher than 20 miles an hour. In fact, it's 29 miles an hour. So that's the average speed along Loxway Road. That's 85% of the vehicles are travelling around 29 miles an hour. And also we've had 7 incidents in the last 5 years, 5 slight incidents and 2 serious incidents. So we designed a scheme, put it out to consultation, and the purpose of the report today is the fact that we received some objections about that consultation, and we've brought those here today. So I'll just run through, obviously it's all available within the meeting pack. I will run through briefly what the scope of the objections were. So there were objections to the location of the speed humps because people asked for more, and actually 2 additional sets have now been added with the use of some community infrastructure levy funding. Other people asked for speed cameras. However, this is not the type of road that it is. We wouldn't put speed cameras down this road. It would be traffic calming measures instead. Anti-skid was requested, but because it's not coming up to a junction or a roundabout, that's not appropriate. There were concerns about the type of speed cushions, so obviously driving over them, would it cause damage to the underside of vehicles? The answer is that these speed cushions are made of a rubberised material and screwed onto the surface of the road, and so there is a lot more give in them than standard concrete constructed speed humps. And obviously there was an objection to say that Loxway Road was too busy for speed cushions, but obviously the response to that was that the reason we're doing it is in order to slow that volume of traffic down. So that's a brief run through of the objections. Let me just go through. Yeah, I've covered all of those. So within the report, we've taken into account those objections and answered them fully. And having assessed those and looked at the data again, we still believe that the installation of traffic calming measures in the form of speed cushions in this case is the most appropriate way of achieving the speed reduction measures that we set out within the local transport plan. So we would like to ask for approval to continue with this scheme.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, I know Loxley Road quite well. It's a long, straight road, and well, it's got a few bends, but not too many. And cars do go speeding down there. I know this is anecdotal. One or two points I'd like to make. It says about somebody said about better sign your speed cameras, enforcement of the 20-mile-an-hour limit. I know you've mentioned the police, but the police won't actually enforce the 20-mile-an-hour limit. The ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, won't do it. I've had battles with them for many years over that, but they will come in and do education and enforcement days.
Yeah, we do work closely with colleagues in Hampshire Constabulary when we are doing some speed enforcement behavioural change campaigns within the city, yeah.
And then there's mention about the speed cushions outside in Eisenbar Brunel Road, which were actually put in by the developers, weren't they? And they were causing major problems, but they have now been changed. They weren't put in by Portsmouth City Council. And they're actually okay now.
No, they were put in by RGB Group with the construction of Chaucer House, turning it into student flats. And yes, we did receive complaints about the speed cushion because it was taking the bottom of vehicles, damaging the bottom of vehicles, and that was changed in February of this year, and it was lowered.
Last point is it says some emergency vehicles, the potential for damage to car suspension. Not if they're going at 20 miles an hour, it won't. So that's, I think, the message to get out to people. You won't damage your cars if you go the right speed. Yeah. Councillor Heaney.
I should get used to doing this eventually. The point of clarification, the emergency services, including fire and ambulance, are they consulted about this, and do they have any views about speed bumps? Because obviously it potentially could affect their time to get to someone. Do they have any issues with it?
Yes, they are consulted, and within the more recent installation of speed bumps have been the rubberised ones.
Yep.
So there's a lot more give within it. So yes, if these aren't going to be raised tables that cover the entire width of the road, they're going to be individual square speed humps, one in each side of the carriageway, which means if the emergency services are driving defensively, they will simply just drive round them. So, yeah.
Councillor Bosher.
Perhaps on a more general comment, Michelle. At some point you mentioned Loxway Road is in the top 10% speed. Is that the top 10% of 20-mile-an-hour roads in the city, or the top 10% as in from a speed data point of view?
So it's from a speed data point of view. So when we do speed data surveys, the actual calculation is what we call a V85. So that basically means that it's the average speed of 85% of the vehicles or more is above what we want it to be, and Loxway Road is in the top 10% of those roads that has that.
Anything else? No. I've got one question, and that's in one of the objections. It's a question. For the benefit of cyclists, I would like the speed bumps to be clear of the curb by 5 metres to enable us a safety margin. This is the cyclist. Is there enough room to do that?
No.
I think that the roads in Portsmouth were wide enough to do that. So what will be the distance?
They'll be approximately 1 to 1.5 metres away from the curb.
It's not very much, is it, for cyclists, but I suppose there's no alternative. If the road isn't wide enough, you can't do anything about it.
The road itself is between 8 to 9 metres wide, so if we had a 5 metre gap, we'd have one speed hump in the middle of the carriageway, which wouldn't really achieve what we were trying to do. And obviously with the speed hump regulations, you can have them, because of the size of them and because they are actually made of a more absorbent material, it's quite possible for a cyclist to ride over the top or ride. And we suggest a position of taking up the middle of the carriageway lane. So rather than have them at the curb, we would want them in the centre, and then they can simply ride over the speed hump the way that anyone else would.
Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to agree to that. I think it's a sensible move.
I'll just ask a question. Again, it's a general question, Michelle, because you've used the phrase absorbent quite a lot with regards to these speed humps, which suggests there is a lot of give in them as you go over. So therefore, the heavier your vehicle, the less the impact is going to be. So therefore, the simple question I've got on that is, what sort of guarantee that they are going to be useful if you've got, if the fact that a heavy vehicle drives over them and doesn't even know that they're there?
So they're still constructed to the speed hump regulations. There's actually an act for them in their own right. I was really impressed. But also, we have so these are tried and tested within the city. So if you go out onto Isambard Brunel Road, you'll see them by Charter Academy. If you go to Knowlesley Road, they're on a bus route. So we already have proven sites where the data shows that the average speed slows down. And obviously Knowlesley Road is a bus route, and Isambard Brunel Road has just been the route to a major construction site. So with the data that we have already with them on site in the city, we're confident that they will achieve what they need to achieve.
So you're relying on the fact that they are a visible deterrent as well?
Yeah.
Well, they are pink, aren't they? So yeah. So they do stand out quite a bit. Anyway, I'm quite happy for that to go ahead. Oh, are they? Right. I wasn't responsible for this. Item number 6, which is safer routes to school. Is this you again, Michelle? Oh, Councillor Symes. No, sorry, Councillor Stubbs. Sorry, I wasn't confusing you, Linda, honestly. Right. Is it you, Michelle?
So the report that we're bringing now is Safer Routes to School, the Albert Road Zebra Crossing. So again, the original funding was agreed in March 2018 in the Local Transport Plan 3, and it falls within the budget, within the scheme of Safer Routes to School, which was an area-wide programme where the funding could be spent in any of the wards, and it allows reactive works on school routes as issues are identified by residents and councillors. So the decision was made to construct the zebra crossing at Albert Road because in August 2017, Craneswater Junior School, where the zebra crossing is located adjacent to, were approved planning permission to construct a new single-storey reception area, 2 classrooms, and basically rework the entire way that the pupils entered and left the school. So the pupils, instead of leaving out mostly onto St Ronan's Road, now left out onto Albert Road. So funding was, a design was drawn up to ensure that these pupils now coming out onto Albert Road obviously had a safe place to cross over Albert Road immediately in front of them. And Craneswater has a capacity of 480 pupils and currently has 442 on rolls, so they're quite near full. So the purpose of the report is the fact that we put out consultation letters in February 2019 and we received some objections to that consultation. So we've brought those objections here in order to gain approval to carry on with the scheme. So some of the objections were that, I'll just summarise them again, obviously they are all available within the meeting pack. And a lot of them are centred around the fact that there are other zebra crossings on Albert Road, and yes, that's absolutely true. There are other zebra crossings along the entirety of the road, but there is not one that is directly accessible by the school itself. And the current school site, so obviously when the entrances changed, we saw a greater increase in the number of children crossing directly over Albert Road. Some of the other objections cited the fact that we have a school crossing patroller, a lollipop person, that already works outside Craneswater Junior School. And the response to that was, if we build an engineered crossing, we then take the school crossing patroller off that site and move them to another site in the area where obviously the need is still as great. So we would be freeing up the school crossing patroller that works on that site to move to a different site within the area. There were objections about the fact that the zebra crossing would result in poor driving, encouraging last-minute braking and over-acceleration in between the zebra crossings. And our response to that was that obviously we would always look to promote positive driver behaviour and adherence to the highway code, and we would work with our colleagues in Hampshire Constabulary in order to monitor the site once it's complete, and if necessary, do some partnership working with them. There was also some objections about the allocation of funding and how it should be spent to improve parking on St Ronan's Road instead of a zebra crossing, and the response to that was that obviously it's two completely separate budgets, and this had come out of the Safer Routes to School budget. And then there were some other suggestions as well about stopping illegal parking around Albert Road and increasing the accessibility to shopping, the shops along Albert Road, to increase obviously community accessibility. And again, we have responded to those residents saying that we will take into account everything that they've said, but within the remit of the Safer Routes to School budget, we can't actually address that. So that's a summary of the objections that were raised, and we're confident that we've answered those points as fully as we can, so we would like to seek approval to continue with the scheme.
Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this scheme really is an inevitable consequence of the expansion of the school, and ever since the decision was taken to make the school larger, that it's been necessary to have some form of crossing here. And I would also fully accept that there's no point in building a pedestrian crossing except where pedestrians want to cross. That if you stick a pedestrian crossing somewhere up the road and say to people, use that, well, they won't. They'll just cross there anyway. So on the general principle, I'm supportive of the proposal that you have in front of you. I do have a couple of questions and comments really, which are on some of the details on this. So one is about how this connects into the eastbound cycle lane that there is on Albert Road. Now, that cycle lane I always think is a strong candidate for being the worst cycle lane in the city, because it's extremely misleading, because you can't have two vehicles passing each other along Albert Road without one of them driving in the cycle lane. So it gives a false sense of security. Now I can't quite make out from this diagram how this scheme relates into that, and I'd like a bit of clarity on that if possible. Another angle on this is to do with, if you look on Appendix 1 on the diagram there, you see that there's a hatched area marked to the southeast on the junction there, and that's roughly outside of the school. Now, outside of the school, you also have, as part of fairly recent changes, a marked bay for minibuses, and you also have a cycle parking facility, which looks a bit like a car, and you can attach cycles to it. And so my question stroke comment is there any way that space, rather than just being a hatched area, could be at least partially used for one of those purposes, and the average space is just reconfigured just to make a marginal, one space at the most, increase in available parking. On the face of it, having cycle parking right next to the pedestrian crossing is not a bad idea, because that means if cyclists are going the other way, then the first point is they can cross the road there, the pedestrian crossing, rather than away from it, in order to turn into the road. So I did wonder if there might be some scope for better use of that space. And then the final thing really is about the visibility of this junction. Now, there's a little bit in the report, it touches on that somewhat in the EIA, but I wasn't really clear about specifically what it means. So there's mention of advanced signage and so on, and that's good. What I've got in the back of my mind is the pedestrian crossing nearer to Kimberley Road over Highland Road, and I've had a number of complaints, and I think that they're fair, which is that it's difficult to see when you're driving along Highland Road. It's not immediately obvious that it's there. And what is the situation on this? How obvious is it? Just going to be signage? Is there going to be beacons there? How obvious is it going to be, particularly since it's on a junction? So that's my final question. So a couple of questions really about the cycle lane, the visibility, and then about whether it might be possible to reconfigure that hatched area to marginally increase parking. But with those points aside, I think the fundamentals of the scheme are sound.
Thank you, Councillor Stubbs. Michelle, can you answer some of those questions, please?
Yep, I can Well, the first thing I can do is look at the drawing. So the drawings were drawn up but they aren't the final drawings, so we can review the drawings and take into account the points, because obviously I can review it on the transcript, take into account the points that you've made. With the cycle lanes, obviously, we don't have the road width to have statutory cycle lanes, so it's a guidance cycle lane, but the guidance cycle lanes still obviously raise awareness to drivers that cyclists are going to be there and within that area. And they're hopefully more like...
So if you're planning to have a cycle lane through that junction, I wasn't clear through the crossing, I wasn't clear looking at the picture.
No, it wouldn't go through it. So if there's a cycle lane either side of the proposed location of it, then it's likely that it will continue either side of it. But obviously a zebra crossing is for pedestrians to have right of way, and therefore vehicles, including cyclists that are on the road, would have to pull up and stop. So we would expect them to do that. If the location of the zebra crossing goes right through the cycle lane, then that cycle lane will stop temporarily, because it would do.
Thank you, Michelle. You said this is not the final plans. Can the final plans come back before work starts?
Well, if the scheme is approved, then we will send the final diagrams out to ward councillors and to yourself for consultation. So,
is that okay with you, Councillor Stubbs? Thank you. Councillor Bosher.
Totally supportive of it, Councillor Stagg. It actually started when I was a cabinet member, well before March 2018, because the school ran a campaign where they were targeting bad parking on I think it's the St Ronan's Road that comes down the side, and other issues. And I went to meet their school council 2 or 3 times. Sitting on infant school sized chairs is not the greatest, but never mind. I think we've all been there as members. And I have to say, the school council that I met were extremely eloquent in their demands. Perhaps a little bit more radical. Cars that parked on double yellow lines, £5,000 fine and have their car crushed was one suggestion that came out of an infant school child. So, braver politician than I have to say on that. And there were similar ones, but the crossing point, particularly for those on the northern side of the Albert Road, was the one thing that came out loud and clear. It's perhaps a shame it's taken so long to actually get here, but we are finally here, and I think, even though we're all politicians and it's gone through 2 different political colours, I think the driving force behind this are actually the school children, and they should really be commended for actually getting what they want to make their lives safer and going to school.
Thank you, Councillor Bosher. Councillor Heaney.
I don't have anything to add. I'm happy to support this. Yeah, no problem.
I have to say that I was a bit amused when I read, not really, not funny, ha-ha, resources should instead be spent on providing more resident parking along St Ronan's Road at the expense of children's safety. I just wonder where people's values are, you know. That's just my personal comment. Right, so I'm happy to approve this to go ahead, and you will get the final plans back to
as soon as the final plans are complete,
councillors.
they will be sent out to yourself, opposition councillors and ward councillors.
And Councillor Stubbs, I know this is not to do with it, mentioned zebra crossing down near Kimberley Road. Can that be sort of looked into? I know there's probably no money around, but at least
we can definitely look at it.
Thank you. Right. Agenda item 7, air quality local plan. Felicity isn't... Oh, you were going to do it anyway, were you? Or was Felicity going to do it? Felicity was going to do it, unfortunately she's doing COVID. Right, okay, so Hayley will give us this.
Thanks, Councillor Stagg. The purpose of this information-only report is to provide an update for noting on the development of Portsmouth's air quality local plan, and the purpose of the plan itself is to reduce levels of nitrogen dioxide pollution in the city. You'll be aware that significant work has been undertaken, as outlined in this paper, The next milestone for us in the development of the Air Quality Local Plan is the submission of the outline business case to central government on the 31st of October this year. This will include the Council's preferred package of measures to improve air quality in the city based on the evidence that's currently being gathered. Thank you.
Has anybody got any comments? Councillor Healy?
Well, as a newly elected member, I've been getting to grips with the issues around air quality, because although I was obviously broadly aware of it, I wasn't quite aware of some of the detail that's been going on, and it's been very interesting. But it does pose some difficult challenges for us, because it seems to me that the government's default position is that you will have a charging zone, and we have to provide evidence that measures that we undertake will do as well as a charging zone in terms of changing behaviour or whatever. So obviously the consultation is still going on, and I'm still learning stuff about this, but I think we need to avoid a charging zone for all sorts of reasons. I think there are issues of equity, and this seems to me not the best way to persuade people to change their habits. We have to have incentives that are carrots as well as sticks, and we probably need more carrots at the moment to try and encourage people to change their ways, which includes a whole range of things which I won't go into now. So I'll obviously be looking forward to finding out more of this as we go on, and hopefully maybe having some influence on shaping what we actually do.
Thank you. Hayley, can you just outline a few of the causes? I mean, for example, the worst offending vehicles, etc.
So you might be aware that earlier this year we undertook what's called an automatic number plate recognition camera survey, and that had lots of cameras around the city. It recorded continuously 24 hours a day for 7 days a week. We picked up 8 million vehicle movements in that time, so it's huge. So that survey has told us more about the local vehicle fleet in the city and the origins and destinations of journeys. So we now know more about what's causing the problem. And for us, unfortunately, the biggest problem is diesel cars. And how do we solve that problem? And we also know that the problem is not just caused by cars coming off of the island onto the island, it's also caused by trips that start and finish on the island, so local trips. So that doesn't make it that easy to solve because of that mixture of origins and destinations. We're also currently conducting some more research, and the survey that you mentioned that is helping us to understand what local people's likely behavioural response would be if we were told by government that we have to have a charging clean air zone. Obviously we've never had one in the city, so we don't know how people would respond. So that survey will give us a bit more information about that, and help us to understand some of the economic impacts that you mentioned, Councillor. And we've asked people for any ideas that they've got for mitigation measures, because within the plan that we're submitting to government, we need to come up with what's called a mitigation package. So come up with ideas to help local people. If a charging clean air zone were imposed on the city, what can we do to help them to manage that cost?
Thank you, Hayley. And just a few points I'd like to make, and that is that we are very aware of the impact that charging could have on low-income families, and the fact that people might not be able to get around to their jobs, etc. So we've written to Michael Gove to ask if there could be scrappage policy for low-income families, and got to think a standard reproduced letter back which didn't say anything really. So I think it's going to need a hard push to get something coming from central government. But I think the thing as well that we need to take into account here on the island, because we are an island, is to have the increase in the number of vehicles on the island. According to statistics, in 2007 there were 107,000 thereabouts cars registered to Portsmouth. At the end of last year there were 128,600, which is an increase of whatever it is, 22,000, with no increase in parking spaces and no increase in the road. So that's led to the congestion. Plus, the number of vans in that time has nearly doubled. So they're contributory factors, and those are things we have to address. And I don't know exactly. It's educating people about anti-idling, for example. I mean, it's only a bit, but it's quite big. But there were 3 people yesterday, because I live next door to a school, waiting for their children. Cars were idling, and they just went up and asked could they turn their engines off, because we have an anti-idling policy. And they said, apologise, and they shut them off. So I think once people are aware of things, a lot of people will actually come around to realising the problems. So, but it's a huge issue. But thank you for that, Hayley. It's just to be noted, I think, isn't it? Right, and I think the next one is also you, is it? Oh, sorry. Oh, so I do apologise. I was thinking that a bit earlier on, and then I sort of got distracted by my own thoughts. Apologies, Councillor.
I know Council's accustomed to me not saying very much, but I thought I might say something on this topic. Don't you look at me like that, Pam. We haven't got to that report yet. I just have a few questions, but I'll start with the obvious ones to me. This is a for information report that's come to the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation, and yet we've got a cross-party working group on air quality that feeds into the Cabinet as well. So why has this report come here then? Or are we duplicating efforts somewhere along the line?
No, we're not duplicating efforts. There's a wide range of work that's being undertaken at the moment, and as you rightly point out, it does cross a number of portfolios. And the work that we're doing in terms of air quality does feed into the climate change wider work that's being undertaken by the council, but we felt it was important to take this report for noting to Councillor Stagg, because obviously this is going to have a significant impact on traffic and transportation portfolio going forward, and we felt it was important to have that baseline just to capture where we are up to in terms of air quality. So it's more of an awareness raising and compilation of information coming into one location that we thought might be helpful.
You mentioned, sorry,
I'm just going to say that this will go out, the overall information will go out to all councillors.
The point I was making, I mean, Pam sort of touched on it, that there are other areas, i.e. other portfolio areas that are also involved in this. Do I deduce, because this is entirely traffic and transport centric, there's no talk about the port or industry or heating systems or anything else like that are all going to have a significant impact, albeit not as much as traffic and transportation I accept. So are there similar reports about other chunks of air quality going to other portfolios?
This report is predominantly based on the Air Quality Local Plan developments. The Air Quality Local Plan is a legal requirement on PCC and necessarily has a traffic and transportation focus because of the timescales involved. As you'll be aware, around 50% of emissions and 50% of the problem, if you like, is attributable to vehicular traffic. Mm-hmm. It's a lever that we can pull quite quickly, or at least the government believe that we can pull that lever quite quickly in order to implement the scale of change that we need to in order to achieve compliance. So there's a vast array of work that is going on which covers the areas that you're talking about, but this in particular, because it's related specifically to the Air Quality Local Plan, and that is looking specifically at traffic and transportation as a way in which we can achieve compliance. That's why it's focused in that way.
Okay, sorry Lynn. So I'm perhaps just concerned, I'm probably just looking for some comfort as much as anything else, that if lots of bits of work are being done across lots of portfolios, that there's actually going to be something that knots this all together at the top. Now, is that going to be this cross-party working group that's going to tie all this lot together? Because having been around for quite a while, I've seen how silos don't work in the past, and I'd hate to think on an issue as big as this, we're going to have different departments duplicating effort and nobody actually talking to each other going forward.
No, I completely understand your concern and can give you that reassurance that we are working in a cross-portfolio way. On the specific issue of air quality, we have a board on which is chaired by the Director of Public Health, which cuts across all the different directorates within the council who have a direct contribution to make. So we do have regeneration, the ports, planning, property, housing, those types of body directors to enable exactly the point you're making, that we are looking at across rather than just in a siloed fashion. As I say, this report is specifically looking at the local plan, which is predominantly based around traffic and transportation, largely due to the timescales that we're dealing with.
Okay, I've got one more, Lynn, if I can. Sorry about that. You did a 7-day monitor around the city. When I take it when you say around the city, you mean on Portsea Island?
No, there were also cameras off the island as well, but the majority were Portsea.
Excellent. Because I know Lynn wound me up when she made the city as an island comment, but you know, because it's not, because about 25% of the of Portsmouth taxpayers actually live off the island. Now, just going forward, what are you looking at mitigating when it comes to those residents that live off the island that admittedly will live in perhaps a cleaner air area because of the density of it, but there is going to be an impact on that area of Portsmouth as and when we start tackling this, and I don't think anybody wants to go down the route of a clean air zone. I mean, call it a congestion charge if you like. I think that's what everybody understands, because that's going to have a material impact on, say, almost 25% of the residents that actually live off the island, in the fact that they are likely to become encumbered with the problems created by people reducing what they're doing on Portsea Island and reflecting out. So what sort of work is being done to look at mitigation side of off the island?
Yes, so that's part of the evidence base that we're gathering at the moment, and the survey that's just gone out will help us really to understand that kind of thing. So in a way, we're fairly lucky, as far as we can be in this process. We're what's called a third wave authority. So there's wave 1 and 2 authorities that have already gone through this process, such as big cities like Leeds, Birmingham, even our neighbour Southampton. So we can learn a lot from what they've done. And some of the measures that they've considered in terms of mitigation are things like scrappage schemes, mobility credit schemes, where people are given funds to spend on public transport, car clubs, that sort of thing. And we could also look at, if government do impose a clean air zone on us, something like an exemption period for local residents both on and off island, so they've got time to think about replacing their vehicle and things to avoid the charge. So yeah, all those kind of things are in the mix, and we're very much looking at them, and we've got consultants working on kind of detailed economic analysis and stuff at the moment. So yeah, it's a big piece of work and something we're giving a lot of thought to.
When are we likely to see that report?
So we need to report to the final report to government's 31st of October. So yeah, by August we should have things ready, because it does need to come to cabinet for sign off as well. So yeah.
Can I just add a few things, and that is that we are working, as Hayley has said, the Environment Department, because the Environment Department is sort of doing all the monitoring as far as what the air zones, the pollution levels are, etc. But the main causes are, as Hayley said, mainly transport, but also buildings. And this is where the problem comes with the time that we've got to get these plans in, because one of the contributory factors in buildings is gas central heating. But you can't just go and rip out all the gas central heating throughout the city, you know. New buildings going up should be compliant and maybe not have gas central heating, have a different form of heating in them. Those are things to be considered a bit further down the line. So although planning are aware of this, they can't do anything about it immediately within the timescale that we've got, which is 2 years. And that's about it. So by the time all the plans are drawn up, it's going to be, well, as Haley said, it's by the end of October, so nothing can start happening really. Well, obviously we're doing some things like trying to get clean air zones and so forth, but the cross-party group is environment, transport and public health at this moment in time. But planning hopefully will come into it at a later date. It's complex, it's not easy, there's no one simple answer. I think I've covered most things there, haven't I?
I think my original point, Lynn, was the fact that I understand it's a complex argument and there are a lot of facets that apply to this. I mean, part of what I do is refrigeration, air conditioning and the like, so I know exactly what the technologies are and aren't that can actually support that. I understand it's complex. My original concern, it was a simple question, was that this is transport-centric report for noting, and I didn't want the bureaucracy to be unnecessarily complex on a particularly complex issue, otherwise we could find ourselves in an almighty mess in 18 months' time. That was where I was starting from, which is why I asked about why this report is here in the first place.
Thank you. Graham? No? Did I ask you before? I can't remember. I did, okay, sorry. So sorry. Right, thank you, Hayley, for noting, right? And now the next one is item number 8, which is transfer to the South East, formal consultation draft proposal to government. And is that you, Pam, or is it Hayley's? Pam, good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report responds to the consultation on the draft proposal to governments for the establishment of Transport for the South East as a sub-national transport board. Portsmouth City Council has been working with around 15 other authorities, as listed in 3.2, for the purpose of creating a long-term strategic plan to enable sustainable growth and improved productivity, and to lever in funding from wider government agencies. The powers being sought are covered in section 6 of the paper in front of you, and can only be enacted concurrently and with the consent of the local highway authority. You'll see that there's quite a wide range of powers being sought, which reflects the broad membership of TFSC, but as I say, the powers can only be enacted alongside the local highway authority, so concurrently with and with the consent of the highway authority. As such, it is recommended that the portfolio holder welcomes the draft proposal to establish a subnational transport body for the South East and approves the attached consultation response for submission to TFSE.
Thank you, Pam. Councillor Bosher.
Did I give the game away? How much does it cost to be a member of this club, Pam?
£30,000 annually.
Is this the same little arrangements that I was trotting off to Gatwick to meet with Alan Cuffley, where we sat there listening to Kent saying how wonderful it was to have transport links going from Dover and Folkestone up into central London for £30,000 a year. It seemed to be all centred in the east of the area. Call me a cynic, and I think we need to be a part of this, but in my experience, the sort of like the Hampshire area and West Sussex were very much being bypassed, shall we say, because I think we identified that really the transport links across the south tend to go up to London and back down again, and there's nothing much that actually goes east-west across the south. But I do notice from the list that Transport for London don't appear to be in this, so clearly the powers that be that have put this together have succeeded in that one, because they were proposed to be part of the original arrangement. But I guess I come back to the original point that as much as it was fascinating, I always found that it was going to be 12 hours of my life I wasn't going to get back, and for £30,000 I'm sure that Councillor Stagg will feel exactly the same way. But I guess we've got to be a part of this club if we're going to try and get something for the South Portsmouth area.
I totally agree with you, Councillor Bosher. In fact, I think it's my second meeting. I thought I'd go to the first and see what's all going on. And I came away thinking, hang on, where are we in this? So the next meeting, I asked when the next stakeholders meeting was going to be held and where. And I was told it was Gatwick. So I said, well, what about Portsmouth and Southampton. And I was looked at as if I was something from outer space. I mean, I know people look at me like that occasionally anyway. But, you know, where's this woman come from? What are you talking about? I think his words were, but that's in the extreme southwest. And I said, yes, it's in the southwest of the southeast. So where do we fit in? Because we need to have connectivity right across the whole region. And I think they're actually giving us more attention now, aren't they, Pam?
Yes, I would agree. I think that TFSE in its current shadow form has been quite vocal in terms of the importance of east-west links both through rail and road, and are certainly supporting us in our work with South Western Rail to improve connectivity specifically between Portsmouth and Southampton. We've also...
That's working well, isn't it?
It's a work in progress. We've also amended the structure that we have in terms of the votes. You'll remember that originally we were joint members with Southampton, which obviously meant that we had half a voice, if you like, and that has been changed now, so we have one vote for each Southampton and ourselves, and are collaborating quite closely still with Southampton, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight in order to ensure that the Solent perspective is very definitely heard at the TFSE meetings.
Councillor Heaney.
Yes, I think we all share the same concerns about this, that this is potentially quite useful. We're not quite sure how useful it's going to be. I mean, clearly talking to each other is very well, but when I'm looking at the powers that it says here, I'm struggling to work out exactly what it will give us, really, in terms of what we can actually do. It talks about securing the provision of bus services, entry into quality bus partnership and bus franchising arrangement. Well, that sounds very good, but I'm not quite sure how much control we will actually be able to exercise. Maybe a cross-authority on some of these issues, because it seems to me that one of the things about transport, it's not about local authority boundaries, it's crossing boundaries. People commute from this area to area, and if we're going to tackle some transport problems, we need to have powers to do things across borders. And when Pam was saying that, you know, the highways authorities have to agree, well, the highways authorities are going to be in large part county councils, so we have to get them to agree to do so. We can't say actually this should be done and they can be overridden. They've got to agree to it. So we have another potential barrier if there's not proper cooperation there. And we're also being talked about here. We are able to jointly setting the road investment strategy for the TFSE. I'm again not quite sure what that means. Whether we get a chance to have our say about what we want, and then the government tells us what we're going to get, or whether we really genuinely do have some influence over what the investment strategy is going to be. Because if we did, it would be really good. But I'm not quite clear whether we will. Again, being consulted on rail franchising, setting the overall objectives for the rail network in the TFSE. Now that sounds quite good. If we are really able to dictate to the rail industry what we want, this is what we want you to provide, you are a service provider, then it could be quite good. But I'm still a bit unclear on this. So any clarification on that would be quite useful. But I share Councillor Bosch's concern. Yeah, we're paying a lot of money, and are we just having a bit of a talking shop, or are we having something that will really make a difference to what we can do?
So I would arguably say, because my first sitting on this was in 2017, I think. It would have been the autumn of 2017. And I think it's indicative that here we are, and you're going to make a decision on spending £30,000 to be part of this, that's effectively 2.5, almost 3 years after it started, and it's still a talking shop trying to work out what its parameters are and what it really wants. And I think that your successor or whoever probably in 5 years' time is going to be doing exactly the same thing, and the only thing that's going to change is the cost of membership, which will unlikely go up.
Do you want me to try and... Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of how influential a subnational transport body can be, if you look at Transport for the North as a comparator, that has obviously been hugely significant in terms of the north of England, in terms of what it's been looking at. The powers and the ability of the subnational transport board to be influential depends to a large degree on the appetite of the members. in terms of how willing we as a collective of authorities are in terms of pushing forward an agenda. I think it's fair to say that TFSE covers an area which wouldn't ordinarily sit together. It's quite difficult to unite. As you said, there's a lot of shire counties, for example, and there's it's not immediately obvious that it is a functional area in that sense. So that is something that we have struggled with, and it is something that we will, I would imagine, continue to wrangle with. But I suppose I would say that this is to make this partnership work, it takes an awful lot of time. The government has shown quite significant commitment to TFSE. 1.5 million has been allocated to TFSE so far in order to create a strategy to undertake the evidence-based review that's needed. TFSE, were it to be awarded statutory status, would end up having quite a significant role to play in terms of the allocation of funding through the major road network. So it is a body that we probably do want to be involved in. Money will be allocated through it, so it's a game that we do want to play, I think. But I do note your concerns. But I suppose it is early days as yet.
I suppose realistically we have to give it a try and see what happens, and if it doesn't work then we have to say cut.
I think we're getting more traction, if that's the right word, because of the two city areas, Southampton and Portsmouth, shortlisted for Transforming Cities Fund, plus Solent Transport. So there's a lot of things, we're actually having visibility, I think, and backing from there, and I think that makes us more important. And it depends how much we shout when we're there, and I'm quite prepared to shout the others. I have to admit there are one or two things I'm concerned about. One is establishing clean air zones with the power to charge high polluting vehicles for using the highway. I mean, I'm not against that in principle, but I want, if we're going to do it, either it gets imposed on us or we make a decision not being decided on by a body outside. That's my personal view. That's not necessarily the view of the establishment. And bus franchising is another questionable area, because again, the bus companies don't want that, and we are relying on First and Stagecoach to help back us up in the Transforming Cities Fund, aren't we? So, it's a balancing act, but I think if we can get ourselves established, and I think we're getting there slowly, but watch this space. It might all go pear-shaped, I don't know. Yeah, fair enough, because I think this is something, it affects the whole city, so it should be completely cross-party as far as that's concerned. But I am reasonably happy to okay it. I do have concerns, I must say. What's our next one? Was that item number 9? Oh, that's you, Pam.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the success of the Portsmouth City Council's Tranche 1 bid to the Department for Transport's Transforming Cities Fund, and on the submission of the draft strategic outline business case for Tranche 2 in partnership with Hampshire County Council and the Isle of Wight. Portsmouth City Council, jointly with Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, were successful in being shortlisted as part of the Transforming Cities Fund bid. We have been in a period of co-development with the DFT since then in order to put forward a bid for what is a very sizable pot of funding. Around 1.28 billion is on offer currently. We submitted a number of short, quick wins, which are listed out in section 3.4, and we were awarded the full £4 million that we asked for in order to commence construction on those sites and the installation of real-time passenger information. And we are now busy working on our the final version of our business case for submission in November. It should be noted also that following the publication of this report, we were successful, along with our colleagues through Solent Transport, as one of 6 bids to have shortlisted in the Future Mobility Zone Fund, and we are proceeding in a period of co-development with the DFT for that fund also. This bid, the Future Mobility Fund bid, will support the work that's being undertaken in both Southampton and Portsmouth through the Transforming Cities Fund. As such, the recommendations of the paper are that the success and progress of the Tranche 1 aspect of the Transforming Cities Fund bid is noted, and that the proposed candidate infrastructure schemes outlined in section 3.14 are endorsed and are developed further for consideration within the strategic outline case for Tranche 2.
Thank you, Pam. And I think we're trying to get a whole council briefing on this, aren't we? Which I asked for, because I think it'll affect most wards in the city. So I think they're having difficulty in finding a room big enough to accommodate all 42 councillors.
That's the date we're looking at, actually, for the next one.
Graham. Councillor Heaney.
Just to ask a question about the, it says the candidate schemes for regeneration in Tranche 2. Presumably this will be whittled down to a smaller number at some point. Is that a correct understanding? That's what I assume, or are we hoping to get all of them?
We're hoping to get all of them. The DFT have asked that we produce a high, medium, low set of scenarios for funding. So we're going big. We're being very ambitious in terms of what we would like to bid for, and then we'll follow that up with a medium and low package, which we will determine in conjunction with our colleagues and also with the DFT with whom we're working in partnership.
So we're making all these ones high priority, hoping to get all of them.
The proposals that we've put together are essentially the culmination of around a decade's worth of work that ourselves, along with Hampshire in particular, have been working on. I think there's increasing recognition of the fact that we need to do things differently, with the air quality position in Portsmouth being as it is, the growth agenda, the levels of congestion, incidents of road traffic collisions being as they are, there is a need that we really consider how we want people to move around in the future and how we want people to be able to access jobs, retail, leisure facilities. And this provides a truly transformational opportunity for the city region to do that. So yes, in an ideal world we would get all of it. It's a very strong bid, I feel. We have very good support, as Councillor Stagg mentioned, from our public transport operators for this, and it offers significant benefit for our residents. We do, however, have to be realistic also, in the sense that there are many officers sitting in front of their portfolio holders and opposition spokespeople saying very similar things to me. So we do need to provide a medium and a low option, and we're working through that. But as I say, we are very enthusiastic about this bid.
I think one of the things as well is that they're all almost interdependent, aren't they? Because if you're going to have free flow of traffic, you've got to have all the points joined up. Councillor Bersher. Really? Okay. Thank you, Pam.
I will say something. Again, the first one with the £4 million started under my watch, but I'm not going to claim it politically. What I would do is say a big shout to all the officers, because we've got a great team in traffic and transportation, and to get some of the funding from some of the places they do is astounding for some of the stuff that we've actually been able to do around the city. So I'd just like to make that comment, that some of the officers we have are top quality when it comes to that sort of stuff.
And when you consider that the number of officers has decreased, with cuts left, right and centre, so people are working beyond beyond the time that is sort of put up for them. So I know lots of people work in their own time, don't they, Nikki? Different matter. But thank you very much. Right, now this is probably going to be the controversial one, yes? Agenda item number 10. So is it Nikki or Kevin? Go on, Kevin, thank you.
Councillor Norton's asked to speak on this.
Apologies, Councillor Norton, would you like to come and join us?
Okay, so I'm going to speak briefly on this. No, me to go?
Kevin will introduce it and then I'll ask you to speak.
Over to Kevin.
I realise you're very eager. But
Very eager. Hot, that's what it is.
Okay.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to propose a number of improvements to the residents' parking scheme that have come out of recent consultations, and to tidy up an anomaly with the scheme. The first proposal is to exclude student halls of residence from eligibility for residents' parking permits. This comes about due to the way in which addresses have been allocated in the past. When initial schemes went in, student halls were classed as one property. The way the modern society's developed, students need to take out contracts and need a postal address, so each student room is classified as a postal address, which makes every room eligible for a permit. There are only a few students currently living in halls that have permits. Last time I looked, it was around 17. So it's really a tidying up exercise to remove an anomaly. The second recommendation is to change the procedure for issuing permits so that people who live in different parts of the city, different controlled parking zones, can share a car. We've had a number of requests from people currently to get a permit. Your car needs to be registered to the address at which you live, and obviously a car can only be registered to one address, so if you're sharing a car and it's shared between two people living in different zones, it's quite difficult. So the way to overcome that is to change the criteria and ask to see the insurance documents, which should confirm the status of both the drivers on the insurance. The third proposal is to introduce a reduced charge for permits for electric vehicles, free permits for electric vehicles for households who only have one car and it's solely powered by electricity, and to reduce the charge for vehicles that emit 100 grams of CO2 or less per kilometre. Again, households that only have one car with that meet that criteria, it's recommended that their permit charge is reduced to £15. In paragraph 310, I've recommended that we exclude all diesel cars because, as we heard earlier, diesel cars have other issues in terms of the particulate emissions that they have. The CO2 threshold of 100 kilograms is what used to be used for tax banding purposes. It's used by many councils. To operate it successfully, you need something that residents can easily check and that councils can easily check, and the CO2 emissions are readily available online. So it's a realistic way of introducing a benefit for people who have lower emitting cars. The fourth recommendation is to reduce the cost of third permits from £590 down to £300. Third permits are only issued in parking zones where there is space for those cars. Currently there's reports that people with 3 cars are not paying the permit charge but parking them in other areas, so it's actually causing displacement. So by reducing the charge, it's still quite a high deterrent to people having a third car, but it's hoped that there won't be so much displacement. The report also highlights 2 other issues. There's been a lot of talk about overlapping boundaries or fuzzy boundaries, and the report describes a way of introducing those to ease problems around boundaries, because currently you can have a permit and only park on one side of the boundary. By designating the bays on either side of a boundary for either permit holder, you can have a sort of overlapping area or a fuzzy boundary. And finally, the report talks about the situation in a number of zones where there are far more permits than there are spaces, and possibly in future zones as well, and suggests that we will be looking at fair ways of limiting the number of permits that are issued. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Norton.
Thank you. I'm only going to speak briefly and off the cuff on this mainly, but it will come as no surprise that once again I'm objecting to what I see as another piecemeal parking zone across this city. And the reason for that is with this one, it hurts business. This is going to be a system which is going to make it very difficult for lots of the traders around that area to function, especially in a time when we should be doing more to save our high streets and protect them. The times of these zones are going to do the opposite. It's going to have a detrimental effect, I think. For instance, if you are somebody who wants to use the local vet that's there, I think people are going to take their poorly cats and not be able to park and potentially, have to walk miles to get to their vet. What will they do? Then they'll go and use a vet somewhere else where they can park, making it very difficult for that area to thrive from a business perspective. On top of that, I think it's about the communications that we have with residents. Now, if I'm a resident in this city, I would not know whether I'm coming or going when it comes to parking zones, because I'm being told constantly various things year in, year out, and the goalposts continually change. One year I'm being told that, if I want a resident parking zone, I can have it. Next, I'm being told that you need 70% of your residents in your street to sign up to it, and then a 50%. Then we get figures that are completely out of nowhere. And I think we have a duty to residents across this city to be more transparent with them in terms of how we're putting these zones in and the levels of consultation that we have. It doesn't help when we get Councillor Stagg's colleagues putting comments out there such as, we've had overwhelming support for this, when, if you ask 3 people and 2 of them say yes, then you could say that's overwhelming support. But I do think we need to be a little bit more transparent with those figures and the responses and how we handle them. Now, this is not just me as an opposition councillor responding to this. I think it's evidently clear that there are people within the administration, or after today, at least one member who's not within the administration anymore, who feels exactly the same. And to quote the former cabinet member for resources on today in the news on residents parking, they didn't listen to residents. Now that's, for want of a better word, straight from the horse's mouth. So it's very difficult, I think, for us to really agree to these kind of things and say that residents are fully informed and we're taking their opinions on board when it's constantly changing. I said I'd keep this brief, and I will. Yes, residents in these areas, on this area, want a resident parking zone, but they've objected to a resident parking zone within these times. The 4:30 to 6:30 means that business owners are going to potentially have to pay for permits for their employees, and the whole situation, yet again, has been handled dreadfully. It's you've heard me say this before, it's neither liberal nor democratic, and how can we put a zone in with less than 20% return?
Thank you. Can I just make a few points? But the cat clinic, we have made provision, or Kevin is making provision for the limited time parking on Albert Road to be extended, the hours extended. Am I right in saying that, Kevin?
Yes.
Yes. And can I quote, 2 vets I happen to know, vets are pets on the... Sorry, Nikki.
No, sorry, I didn't have a different view. I just didn't realise we were discussing a particular parking zone, and I'm sorry.
No.
Talking about, because Councillor didn't refer to which zone he was talking about, so I don't know.
MD.
MD, yes, okay.
All right.
So can I quote, pets are vets on Milton Road, they haven't got parking specially set aside, and no well, no special parking. Grove Vets, which I use in Elm Grove, has none, and often I have to go around and find some, but I always find some in the end. The percentage majority, that has not changed dramatically. When I was Cabinet Member back in 2008, 2009, thought that we needed to get 51% of people responding. We tried that with Councillor Ken Elcombe, who was then parking manager, and it just didn't work. We tried several, and the response, people are busy lives, so it's not moved around, so it's gone back to as it was before I took over in the first place, and that is a majority.
And how much
let me just finish, please. And can I just say about the MD, the Councillor Jeanette Smith, her objection was the timing, and which we said we will review. And we said that way before any comments were made by anybody else. And it was essentially for residents, and it was a very simple time to be able, because it fitted in with MC, from the point of view of enforcement. It's pointless having a residence parking zone if you haven't got the CEOs to enforce it. Otherwise, people will just be fed up. They're paying for a residence permit and they're not getting one. So I just wanted to clarify those points.
So on that, so how many residents have said that they are happy for a resident parking zone to go in around those times in MD?
The MD report was taken a week ago, and that decision's been made. I'm sorry, I don't have the report.
Okay.
Yes, it was a week last Monday. It was taken by Cabinet. Okay. Right. Councillor, Councillor Heaney, I think, is next. I'm trying to alternate you, so I don't leave anybody out. Right.
Okay. Well, I don't know whether Councillor Norton was expecting the MD zone to come to this Cabinet meeting, because I think a lot of us were. But it didn't. It went to the full Cabinet, and because I was able to attend, rearranging my work commitments to do so, and did actually make a very strong point about the fact that the decision had been moved at such short notice, and had inconvenienced quite a number of people, including me, but more particularly residents who had hoped to come along and have a say, and ended up not being able to because they were not able to come along at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, when they could probably have come along at 4 o'clock or now 20 past 5 on a Thursday afternoon. So I had expected to be able to deal with it here, and obviously it's certainly something that I do hope will not happen again. I think the point's been clearly made. In relation to the report that we've got in front of us, I mean, there are some changes which I think I quite understand on student halls residents. I understand why you'd want to make those changes. I understand why you'd want to encourage people to have low emission vehicles and give them some benefit as a result of that. I think the one thing I'm a little puzzled about is the third permit price one, because basically the argument, I can see an argument that's saying if you have a zone which is only 2 hours, then I can understand that somebody might not buy a third permit because it's cheaper to buy visitor permits. I understand. But is it therefore proposed that this reduced cost for third permit charge will only apply in the 2-hour zones, or will it occur across the board? That's one question. Come back to that in a minute. What is the evidence that we have about displacement of third vehicles? Because I'm not quite sure how we know who's got third vehicles. We know how many people apply for permits. There are apparently 37. But somebody who just didn't want to apply wouldn't apply. So how do we know how many third vehicles there are in RPZs? I'm not sure we know what the displacement effect is on that. So I'm curious about that. And so I'm not quite sure what the real benefit of reducing the charge will be, except for the 2-hour zones. On the fuzzy, we'll call it the fuzzy boundaries, I suppose, there were clearly some issues relating to the MD area, particularly in Campbell Road. That was when we didn't have a parking zone in one area and we did have one in another. Is it the proposal, the suggestion that fuzzy zones would apply in areas where there is a parking zone and the boundary has no parking zone, or is this a issue where people will be able to choose which zone to park in if there are 2 adjacent parking zones? Because I'm a little unclear about that as well. That's another question I wanted to ask. In terms of the limit on spaces, when you talk about permit numbers and regions, I mean, partly the reason you end up with a situation of not enough parking spaces and more people apply for them is the way you draw the boundaries. I mean, clearly the way you draw boundaries will, to an extent, provide the geographical limits of a scheme. If you draw them in such a way that is quite tight, you might end up with a situation where you do create a situation where there are more residents with cars than can possibly park in those streets. So I think this goes back to the idea of how you design schemes. I mean, Nikki will probably fed up with the sight of me because I've been asking lots of questions about how parking systems to get my head around how this all works, because it is quite complicated. And I can see that there are some areas where there is a gap, and I've obviously been able to see where those are, but a lot of areas where there isn't. So the issue about the permit number seems to me about how you draw the boundaries. And I think any attempt to maybe artificially tell people when you create a parking scheme that, well, you've lived here for 20 years, but now we've got a parking scheme, and actually you can't have more than one car, you can't have more than two cars, yeah? When they may have had three cars for all sorts of reasons, which I could give you. So I have a number of questions really about the proposals.
Kevin, can you answer
thank you.
those as the expert?
Thank you. The proposal for the third permits goes across the board, so throughout all zones. In terms of the evidence for it, we have a lot of reports from residents living outside zones that cars are being displaced. But yes, you're right, it's very difficult to tell exactly how many third cars there are.
I mean, we have the issue where people say, oh, the cars parked they're all student cars. Well, how do they know they're student cars? There is often an assumption that it's certain types of people. So that's how they know.
Yeah, but it's anecdotally reported to us. So in terms of the fuzzy boundaries, the proposal, or the way it can be done with a TRO, is you would have a boundary that says this is area A, and another boundary that says this is area B, and anybody living in area A would get an area A permit, anybody living in area B would get an area B permit. But what you can do on that boundary, rather than being limited by that boundary, if you've got an A and you're right on the boundary, you can't currently park in the bays directly across the road. So by designating the bays either side of that boundary for A or B permits, you overcome that problem. So you would still have a fixed area which would decide what permit letter designation you got, but the bays on either side of the boundary would be flexible for either permit holder. Does that? And in terms of overcoming the number of vehicles by designing the zone or the size of the zone, in some cases that's limited, because if you have too big a zone you get cross-commuting across it, so and you can defeat the point of having a zone, because if you've got an attraction like a shop or a station and the zone is too wide, then people will go across it. So what we're intending to do is look at fair ways of limiting permits within the zones, and if there are other ways of doing it, I'm sure we'll consider those as well.
Any other questions, Councillor Heaney?
Not really. I will look forward to seeing the fair ways of limiting parking permits.
Councillor Bosher, I'm sure you're going to wax lyrical on this.
I was just looking at the clock, actually. Lynn, I've got a meeting at 7, so plenty of time on this one. First, I'd like to congratulate Kevin. Having spent my school years going on and being taught and thinking, what's the point of a Venn diagram? I've waited almost 40 years for somebody to come up with an example of one with fuzzy boundaries that comes close to a Venn diagram. So you got me before I retired on that one. Just touching on MD zone, because I couldn't make the meeting because it was 10 o'clock on a work day, and it seems that the Cabinet have decided you didn't make the decision as the Cabinet member, and I think it's only happened once before, and that was MB and MC, I seem to recollect. The Cabinet did a rush decision, so clearly they don't trust their Cabinet members. But we're reviewing it in 6 months' time. So if I understand that right, we've had an informal consultation, come up with a TRO, had a TRO consultation, decided whether people wanted the times or not, so that was what we were going to go with. So we're going to spend out on the signage and everything else and put the TRO in. And then in 6 months' time, we're going to do another informal consultation, see whether people like it or not. And if they don't, we're going to go through another TRO, we're going to go out for a formal consultation, and then we're going to spend more money changing all the signage.
Can I just...
Nobody's disagreeing with me, they're all looking blankly, but...
Can I just say that the option, we could have actually not gone ahead with the TRO, but it would have had it. To change the time, we would have had another TRO, so we'd have to go for another consultation, and that would have held up things for, I don't know how many months?
You're quite right, Lynn, but that's actually what you've just said is what you're proposing to do in 6 months' time, but...
Well, the idea was that let's see if it works. If it doesn't work, we will change it. It may well work, because a lot of these, once you put them in, the hoo-ha dies down. It may not. Let's see. I don't know. I can't forecast.
That's a cynic, it's me. Okay, I've got several questions on this, and it's a case of where do I actually start? Let's start with student halls of residence. I guess the TRO that was legal issue that delayed the text parking report has been resolved now then, has it? And so that they're not treated as individual units, they're treated as one building from a TRO point of view.
That's right, yeah.
Now, you've sort of targeted the student halls of residence, where if you go to your Director of Finance comments, there are currently 17 passes issued to people living in student halls of residence. It's anticipated that the loss of income will be in the region of £510 per annum. So we seem to have targeted something on the perception when actually it's not necessarily the halls of residence that we're talking about, it's the students that live in HMOs in residence parking zones that seem to be the issue that people get. So what are we actually doing with the university with regards to stopping all students rather than us actually tackling a few student halls of residence where actually there's only 17 passes actually being issued? Because clearly it's a university issue that rather than pander to it, they should actually be doing something a little bit more robust to make sure that the perception, and it is a perception because depending on who you actually speak to, some say it's always students and others will say we don't have that many students with cars, but clearly the anecdotal evidence, which is what we've used quite a lot as a phrase, says that it's actually students that don't live in halls of residence as such, but actually live out in the communities that are causing the issue. Because we can't tackle those, and actually they can get round it by registering their car at an address, and ka-ching, they've got themselves a zone permit.
Do either of you want to comment, or Pam? Yeah.
Certainly, anybody who lives in a zone who registers their car to that household is entitled to apply for a residence parking permit. As you'll have seen from the pricing structure that we are recommending in this report, it does increase quite significantly from a first permit, and that is a way of encouraging households to have fewer cars rather than more cars. But in terms of meeting the eligibility criteria, we're not proposing limiting that for certain sectors of the population based on whether they're students or not, in that sense.
Well, you sort of are limiting it because it comes under the equality impact assessment, says something slightly different, but hey-ho. Right, going backwards.
Can I just come in there? And I believe this has all come about with the new blocks, the halls of residence, because if some of them have got 300, 400 students each. Nikki.
Yeah, I think the two are linked actually. So at the minute, these are talking about existing residence parking zones and closing a loophole whereby we've got these big blocks that have been built that previously had one postal address, Now each room's got its own post address. At the minute, under the criteria, we can issue a maximum of 2 resident permits per address. So potentially, each of those rooms is entitled to 2 permits.
I know it's saying, but that was
HMO
addressed as part of the TRO last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, sorry, it has to be advertised now. It's coming to this decision-making to get agreement to go out to the TRO.
Sorry, so the phraseology of the TRO that was in place last year, which created problems because each student, let's say student unit, could apply for a residence parking zone, which delayed the text report into parking by 6 months because it had to be rewritten. That was the advice I was given as chairman. Is only now coming to this meeting now to actually have it resolved.
This is the first meeting since we got agreement, legal agreement on the writing of the TRO, and we also had to, well, we also consulted with the university, so we've got everything in place, but we need a decision to go ahead and advertise it.
I think we're entering into the realms of a conversation for another day, in all honesty, because I'm going back to chairing that report, and I had good advice at the time, and this is going back to August and September of last year, that we could not sign off the residence parking report that went through the text panel until the TRO regarding student accommodation had been resolved, and we sat there until February or March time before we were told it's resolved and you could now sign it off, and we got it done and dusted at the 11th hour before Purdah, when I had made commitments to people in the public that we wanted it signed off in September the previous year, got made to look quite stupid because it then delayed 6 months, and now we're considering this TRO at this meeting now, which sort of begs the question, why was the advice I was being given last autumn not fitting up with what we actually got before us now?
The issue that delayed the text report was exactly as you say, the fact that we had this loophole and we didn't know what to do about it, in the sense that it came to light at the very last minute that what we had understood to be correct from the text perspective, i.e. if you live in a student halls of residence you are ineligible for a permit, was not accurate at all, in fact. And that was because of the change in the addresses. So it was understanding how we could get from that point, i.e. we've got a problem, what do we do about it, and getting the solution that was the issue, which led to the delay, because we couldn't sign off a report that didn't have a clear way forward on particularly that issue, because obviously it raised issues around the potential for quite a significant increase in applications for permits from students if we didn't have a clear solution, and also we needed to understand that the university was on board with what we were doing in terms of the approach we were then able to identify, i.e. going through the TRO route in order to limit the opportunities for those who are living in student blocks. So that was what the delay was associated with the text report.
We actually inserted something, Lynn, we actually inserted something into the text report which, off the top of my head, and I haven't got the report and I would need to check, actually said it had been resolved, which in theory, if we're sitting here at this meeting about to sort of like go forward with the TRO on that, actually that's not quite true.
I'll have to double check the wording because I don't remember myself either.
I think we're moving into something that I need to look at elsewhere, Lynn.
I have no knowledge of this at all.
No, and I'm not, and with respect, Lynn, I'm not hanging it on you in any shape or form. It's just.
I just want to make it clear.
It's just come out of this. Under 3.4, the insurance document confirms that both the registered keeper and the share of the insurer are insured to drive the car, and the vehicle can be kept at either of the 2 addresses. Are we legally entitled to ask for that information?
Yes, I believe we are.
Okay.
I believe we can ask for any information that we want. It's up to the applicant whether they want to provide it.
Okay, now I come back to the recommendations, so I sort of work backwards through the report. And they're about as fuzzy as the boundaries, if you actually look at it, because the recommendations are what you're going to hang the process on at the end of the day. So what's contained in 2 is effectively what we're actually going to go through, not necessarily the bulk of the report. Now, when I first read this, and let's look at 2.2 little 1. The charge for permits are changed to allow households with one vehicle powered solely by electricity to obtain a permit free of charge. And it goes on to reduce the others. Well, let's take the electric one, free of charge. I read that I could have 2 vehicles. One of them's an electric vehicle, one of them is something else. And then you could look at it and say, okay, do I have my first permit free and then have to pay £100 for a second permit for a second car? Or am I crafty and say, I'll have my other car for £30 and get my electric vehicle for free? Because that's the interpretation of the recommendations that you've actually got in this report. It's only when you go further into the report that it infers that it's only one vehicle. The same applies when you actually look at one vehicle which emits less than 100 grams of CO2, can have a £15 permit. And the same argument applies there. Do I have my vehicle with 101 grams as my first car at £30 and I get my second one for £15? But actually, should it be £15 for the first one and £100 for the second one? But actually, it doesn't mean any of that at all. It means one household is limited to one car that fits that criteria and no more when you look into the body of the report. But you've got to hang the recommendations on the policies that you actually put out. And those recommendations are ambiguous in what they actually say in the first instance. It also doesn't address the fact that if I own one electric car and I get my first permit for free, and then let's say 6 months down the road my partner decides to buy a car with 101 grams of CO2, are we as a local authority going to turn around and say, no, sorry, you can't have a second car, you're not allowed a second car, because that's what our recommendations say? Or are we turning around and saying, yes, you can have a second car, it's £100, but you've got to pay £30 for a first permit, even though it's an electric car? There are so many ambiguities around these recommendations that it makes fuzzy boundaries seem clear and straightforward to me. And I think you need to look very carefully at how these have been written, because I think I've just explained. I've just interpreted some of those in 4 or 5 different ways, and from what I've actually read there, but actually when you go into the body of the report, all my interpretations actually aren't true because it's just limiting you to one car.
Would it, if it was inserted, so charge for permits are changed to allow households with only one vehicle, which is powered solely by electricity, would that satisfy it or not? I'm not 100% certain.
It's your decision.
No, I'm no expert on English grammar or.
Can I just ask that we get some clarification from what is meant? Because I think Simon's made a point about it's not. I thought I understood it when I read it, but maybe it's not. So we need to be clear. The recommendation says one thing, and the body of the report actually says something very slightly different. So could we have clarification on what recommendation?
The recommendation is that households with only one vehicle which is powered by electricity get a free permit, and that households with only one vehicle which emits under 100 grams of CO2 per kilometre can get a permit for £15. If a household has 2 vehicles, then that discount doesn't apply. It doesn't mean they can't get a second permit, it just means that discount doesn't apply. If they get a second permit partway through the year, then I would suggest they will have a problem at renewal.
I'm sorry, Lynn, but on the one hand, you've got the head of parking here that's having to explain this and using words like, I would suggest that. This has got to go out and it's got to be as clear as day to residents when they are applying for permits black and white as to what they can and can't do. And what you are trying to say here is that you can only have, if you have an electric car, you can only have one vehicle. It doesn't say what happens if you have two vehicles in this at all. Whether you are actually having, because you've got a second vehicle that is a normal car, whether you still get your free permit as an electric car. You have created so much confusion with your recommendations. Like I said, I've given you 4 or 5 scenarios here, and even now I'm getting, I would suggest this and I would suggest that. Because you can't retrospectively go back, I would have thought, and said to somebody who's got an electric vehicle, run a vehicle, free permit, that 6 months down the line they say, okay, my partner is buying a vehicle, you can't have that permit anymore, and you've got to backdate it and charge it, because I would imagine you might find yourself in a sticky situation with regards to that.
I have to admit, I had read it the way I knew it was meant to be. So, and I didn't even think about that.
Chair, can I just come in? The paragraph 3.7 says, it is recommended there is no charge for permits for households which only have vehicles powered solely by electricity. Now that is clear, but the recommendation under 2.2.1, which I think Simon has picked up on, it says the charging permits are changed to allow households within one vehicle powered solely by to obtain a free permit of charging to reduce the charger. It doesn't say only one vehicle powered.
But on the other hand, 3.7 says vehicles, plural. Does that mean I can have 2 or 3 electric vehicles, or 2 or 3 permits, all free?
It's plural households.
Households, plural, which only have vehicles, plural, powered solely by electric vehicles. It's your interpretation of the English behind it, I guess.
But if they're
You need
households,
an appendix,
plural.
to be quite honest, Lynn, and you haven't got that, because I said, those recommendations can be interpreted in a variety of different ways, and I would say that you may well have a legal issue if you're interpreting them in one way and a resident interprets them in the way that I have interpreted, that challenges you and says, hold on a minute, I'm having my first permit for 30 quid on my standard diesel car, and actually my second vehicle is an electric one, I want my 100 quid permit for free. And I think you find yourself in a mess.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Kevin, do you have any comment?
Yeah, the recommendations were actually clarified by the city solicitor when he was looking at the report. And the process will be clarified in the TRO when we go out to consultation.
So what you're saying, what you're saying then is, these are the recommendations that are going to go out. If you're clarifying something, you're potentially rewriting it to make it clearer. So what you are agreeing to here as the recommendations may not necessarily be the wording that goes out on the legal TRO. If you want to put your name to that, Councillor Stagg, I wish you luck.
No, I see where you're coming from. And I have to admit, this is one of my suggestions, because I said it was all stick and no carrot. So I think we need to actually reward or help people, to help them have more sustainable transport, etc. So this is where it came from. So I don't know, what should we take this out, this agenda item out? Can we do that?
If you want an opposition spokesman's point of view, I would suggest you pull this and get it cleared and come back to another meeting.
That's what I'm asking. Joe?
It's up to you if you want to take, if you're happy with part of the recommendations, to pass them and come back on the other one.
Okay. We better wait for the rest of Councillor Bosch's comments, because I'm sure there are more to come. Let's hear your other comments.
Chair, can I come back? I think it is unfortunate. We didn't get the draft of these reports at the meeting. We literally got them presented to us on the day, so we didn't really get a chance to look at them in advance, and then only had, sorry? No, the briefing meeting. We didn't get these reports.
Oh, I'm with you,
yes.
yes.
The briefing meeting. They were literally presented to us on the day, so it's quite difficult to follow what was going on. So only when we've had a chance to sort of read this afterwards, and of course then the chance to ask questions and clarify things would have probably been an opportunity then just to make clear that the recommendation, because I think if you had a chance to look at them, we could have maybe asked some questions about the clarity of the recommendations then, because I certainly think that there is potential for us, so I do hope we can rectify that. I mean, I do think the recommendations of reports have to be clear, so that when we leave this room, we know what we've decided, not then walk away and say, oh, we're going to reinterpret it and all that, because it's your decision and it's our decision, and so we do need to be clear. And not wishing to be pedantic, but there are some strange spelling mistakes and grammar things in here, which I think also may have been a result of the rush of getting this done. But I won't bother. I won't bother with those at this stage. But yeah.
I would agree. I mean, it can be interpreted in two ways, which just never occurred to me, because I suppose, as I say, I was reading it because I knew exactly what was meant, because I was the one who'd actually suggested it in the first place. So, and I didn't think that it could be interpreted. Well, it never occurred to me it could be interpreted any other way. So, I can defer just this one recommendation, or the whole agenda item.
Is it a whole TRO? Yeah, you do have another meeting coming up, should you wish to defer.
So is that the whole of agenda item 10? Yes, and I think that's sensible.
And you can clarify, you can get more legal advice that
Yes, and I think it needs to go past Councillor Bosher before it goes out next time. Is that fair enough, Simon? So we'll pull this one, or defer it until, when is it, August the 8th? Yes, okay. And I think, I think that's the end, yes? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Simon and Graham. Yeah.